Raylene Garwood has proudly served in both the Australian Army and the Royal Australian Air Force. Today, she dedicates much of her time in supporting fellow veterans through her volunteer work in the welfare space. Her deep passion lies with the Waler, a rare military pedigree horse breed with bloodlines that stretch back before World War I.
I was told, at the time it was a backhanded compliment, but I've learnt to appreciate the wisdom of that particular selection panel's decision, that I was probably too set in my ways to be successful at RMC in terms of the ability of the military to break you down, whether it's through fatigue, physical training, or just hard work, and then rebuild you in the identity of an officer that the Army wanted. One of the best and one of the worst things about being a veteran. It is very easy to become a victim veteran, and where's my entitlement? Bloody DVA. Oh, it's so unfair, I need 80 points, I want a gold card and $90,000 for my kids. The legislation is better than any other country in the world. It doesn't mean that the legislation can't be better, but I think what most veterans fail to understand or haven't been taught or just told is that the military promises that DVA will look after you when you get out. The military is in no position to make that promise. To my mind, the biggest sin that has been committed, the biggest crime that has happened to veterans is the monetisation of the veteran, rather than the recovery and reintegration of the veteran.
You mentioned about some other work you're doing. Tell me about your work around the Veterans Retreat.
Okay, so it's a 4-bedroom, nearly new house located at Interlaken, which is up on the Central Highlands. It's about halfway between anywhere and anywhere, halfway between Launceston and Hobart, but it is in a shack precinct. So there's no infrastructure up there at all in terms of street lights, post offices, shops. And it is adjacent to the Vietnam Veterans Bush Retreat, which was built about 30 years ago. And it was built to be a space that the Bush Retreat and our retreat was built to be a place where you could get away from the world, get away from the white noise, that was comfortable and safe either for a group of veterans to get together and go fishing, or to take your family and just chillax. I've been up there in the snow, I've been up there in the middle of summer, great fishing. Lake Sorrel's recently become carp free. They're starting to pull good brown trout out of there, but it's just a place where you can go for a bit of peace and quiet.
That's the Veterans Retreat. What about your work with horses?
Yes. The whole synchronicity of, I've always had horses, often horses that have a certain death wish which involves me, not them. But when I was in Tyndall of a weekend, I'd go mustering. One of the guys had a mustering contract, and the first I knew about it, he said, "Oh, here, you've got a saddle up here." I went, "Yeah." He goes, "You want to come horse riding?" I went, "Yes, thanks." And started mustering first on Mambaloo and then on VRD, which is Vic River Downs. And of course the Waler horse is the breed that took the Australian light horse to Damascus, and was the first successful conquering crusade since the Knights Templar to actually enter Damascus and Jerusalem, which is no small feat. And they are legendary in terms of their load carrying and their endurance, but I think what sets them apart is they are a breed like no other. They want to bond with you, and they have to be number one horse in the pecking order. I was told, at the time it was a backhanded compliment, but I've learnt to appreciate the wisdom of that particular selection panel's decision, that I was probably too set in my ways to be successful at RMC in terms of the ability of the military to break you down, whether it's through fatigue, physical training, or just hard work, and then rebuild you in the identity of an officer that the Army wanted. One of the best and one of the worst things about being a veteran. It is very easy to become a victim veteran, and where's my entitlement? Bloody DVA, oh, it's so unfair, I need 80 points, I want a gold card and $90,000 for my kids. The legislation is better than any other country in the world. It doesn't mean that the legislation can't be better, but I think what most veterans fail to understand or haven't been taught or just told is that the military promises that DVA will look after you when you get out. The military is in no position to make that promise. To my mind, the biggest sin that has been committed, the biggest crime that has happened to veterans is the monetisation of the veteran rather than the recovery and reintegration of the veteran.
You mentioned about some other work you're doing. Tell me about your work around the Veterans Retreat.
Okay, so it's a 4-bedroom, nearly new house located at Interlaken, which is up on the Central Highlands. It's about halfway between anywhere and anywhere, halfway between Launceston and Hobart, but it is in a shack precinct. So there's no infrastructure up there at all in terms of streetlights, post offices, shops. And it is adjacent to the Vietnam Veterans Bush Retreat, which was built about 30 years ago. And it was built to be a space that the Bush Retreat and our retreat was built to be a place where you could get away from the world, get away from the white noise, that was comfortable and safe either for a group of veterans to get together and go fishing, or to take your family and just chillax. I've been up there in the snow, I've been up there in the middle of summer, great fishing. Lake Sorrel's recently become carp free. They're starting to pull good brown trout out of there, but it's just a place where you can go for a bit of peace and quiet.
That's the Veterans Retreat. What about your work with horses?
Yes. The whole synchronicity of, I've always had horses, often horses that have a certain death wish which involves me, not them. But when I was in Tyndall of a weekend, I'd go mustering. One of the guys had a mustering contract, and the first I knew about it, he said, "Oh, here, you've got a saddle up here." I went, "Yeah." He goes, "You want to come horse riding?" I went, "Yes, thanks." And started mustering first on Mambaloo and then on VRD, which is Vic River Downs. And of course the Waler horse is the breed that took the Australian light horse to Damascus, and was the first successful conquering crusade since the Knights Templar to actually enter Damascus and Jerusalem, which is no small feat. And they are legendary in terms of their load carrying and their endurance, but I think what sets them apart is they are a breed like no other. They want to bond with you, and they have to be number one horse in the pecking order. I joined the Army Reserve for a bet with young Stu Ralph, who was in one of my classes at Launceston College. And every Monday morning Stu would come into, I think it was Indonesian of all classes, telling horrible war stories and basically, just being a war hero. And I went, and he goes, you wouldn't even last a recruit course. So somewhere in Kabul, 20 years later, when I saw Stuart as a contractor, we decided the $20 bet was probably sorted and we'd just call it even on beers. So that's why I joined. I was doing law at university and planned to be a lawyer. I'm rather glad that I changed my career to defence, but the irony is that as a senior officer, as a senior junior officer, I spent most of my career doing contract law in logistics support. So I got my law degree kind of through experience, I guess.
And when you're referring to Stuart talking about, obviously, war stories, he's talking about his reserve training.
Yeah,
and
weekends.
And the weekend warrior type reserve.
And I, to be honest, the Army Reserve training that we received at OCTU, as it used to be then, the Officer Cadet Training Unit, was probably still some of the best training I have seen in the ADF. I thought that I would join to become an OR. My plan was to drive trucks. And Lieutenant Colonel Fred Ralph reappraised my decision making. So after I'd done my recruit course, I went to OCTU.
Your OCTU course was over what years?
1991 to 16th of November 1991 was my recruit course. Marched into OCTU 1992, graduated 1993.
And what corps did you transfer into?
I went to the Corps of Trucks, despite having an absolute love of infantry minor tactics. Back in the early 90s, women still were not perceived as being enabled to join the infantry, so I went to the Corps of Trucks.
So down the track, you decided that you love the military life.
I did, yeah.
What's the next steps in the career of Raylene?
Well, I actually applied. I'd done some work with Project Wellesley, which was the first co-design for officer training with reserves and regs, and enjoyed it so much that I thought, you know what, I might do RMC myself and pursue a full-time career in the Army. I was told, at the time it was a backhanded compliment, but I've learnt to appreciate the wisdom of that particular selection panel's decision, that I was probably too set in my ways to be successful at RMC in terms of the ability of the military to break you down, whether it's through fatigue, physical training, or just hard work, and then rebuild you in the identity of an officer that the Army wanted. So, having had my heart broken, I thought, well, let's just see what else is out there. And as a logistician, I looked at Air Force, not because first to fourth line supply or logistics was boring, but Air Force also did project acquisition, etc. So I applied for and was commissioned in 1997. Lost 6 years of seniority in the process and went back to being a pilot officer in the Air Force.
Tell us about your Air Force career.
First posting was RAF Base Tyndall, so you couldn't get any further away from Tasmania in terms of the middle of the Northern Territory. Left home in July, I think it was -2 on the boat, and it was one of the last sailings of the Sea Cat and one of the roughest. And made our way up to RAF Base Tyndall, and that was an eye-opener for a number of reasons. Spent 7 years at RAF Base Tyndall as part of the inventory at the end, and in that role, in roles up there, warehousing RAF movements and 75 Squadron, so the fighter squadron. And in that period of time, we had the first deployment interfet to East Timor, and I was responsible for hosting what felt like the cast of thousands that turned up at RAF Base Tyndall, including the SAS and the boys from 3 Brigade who went over on the Black Hawks well before the main body deployed out of Townsville. So from there I went up to Darwin in air movements and then across to Timor. Wasn't deployed to Timor as such, but did, I think in the end, 29 days, not sequentially. In fact, I did 29 days. The last day wasn't sequential, but Honours and Awards said that's close enough, so I got my Interfet medal. Came back, went back to 75 Squadron. There is no finer squadron in the Air Force as far as I'm concerned. Had a number of exercise deployments into Southeast Asia with them, and then went across to Townsville and got there in 2002. And the following year we deployed to the Middle East. I went across with the ECSW, so the Expeditionary Support Wing. It was the first time Australia had deployed the expeditionary support element to a fighter squadron, and the first time a fighter squadron had gone to war since Vietnam. So it was just like coming home. I knew all the techos, all the pilots. What I didn't know, working in headquarters of the Task Element Group, was that the footprint was so light that they couldn't get any movers into country, and the 2 movers that were already in country had to go forward to Kuwait. So I ended up working out of Ali Al Saleh as the JMCO det for Qatar, which meant that I was then seconded to the Special Forces det, who had an amazing talent for falling asleep on aircraft and missing their stops and then getting them back from various airfields around the Middle East to their home base, which at that time was Qatar. So yeah, 2003, back in May of 2003. 2004 I was posted, dragged kicking and screaming to RAF Base Wagga, where I took over the staff officer driving and at ground training, which was straight back to RACT days, which was fabulous. From there I was accepted into the ATSOC, which is the Australian Technical Staff Officers course. And it was in the first month of ATSOC that I realised that there was something terribly wrong, and was diagnosed with adjustment disorder and potentially PTSD. The disappointing part of that for me was not the diagnosis, but the treatment that the management agency, the career management agency in Canberra, when I went to them and said I can't continue ATSOC, it's literally doing my head in and I'm not as well as I thought, their response was, had we known you were ill, we'd have never selected you for that course. And that was a bit of a kick in the guts. Anyway, silver lining to that was that I ended up in what was then DMO, Defence Materiel Organisation, Australian ASD, so Aeronautical Space Division, and finally at year 14 or 15 of my Air Force career started to do 5th and 6th line logistics acquisition projects and block obsolescence of fleet. It was so much fun that I volunteered to deploy for Timor in 2008 and in 2007 I think. Yeah, 2007, sorry, and hit headquarters in November, it might have been a bit earlier, of 2007, came home in about April, May 2008, and then did a posting swap for Townsville. A friend of mine had sick parents, so I took her posting to Amberley. She went to Townsville and I went to the newly formed Combat Support Group Coordination Centre, where I was coordinating logistics across all the ECSSs and all of the support activities for major operations.
So during this path, Raylene, you've spoken about some mental health challenges. How did you find yourself, as you're still trying to progress your career, up against trying to manage mental health?
I think the stigma that everybody acknowledges but very few people speak about is that if you were open about your mental health issues, the very real risk is that you would be discharged immediately. And I saw a contracted psychologist in Amberley. I was assaulted by a peer in Timor, and it really, not so much the physical altercation, but the betrayal that you are sent to defend your country, and then when something happens, the organisation just goes, "Oh no, that's too hard to deal with." That was what really I think tipped me over the edge in terms. So I saw the contracted psychologist on base, and apart from the fact that he'd been to the Antarctic, which was still on my wish list, it was terribly useless. So counting colours and de-escalating and all that sort of stuff. It didn't give me the cognitive background to what that activity did and how that then would help me manage my own mental health. So I just didn't talk about it. And even getting out, it's most of the medical profession that do the exit interviews for your transition will go for your physical injuries, particularly the contracted medical staff, because it's not, you have two sets of records. You have a medical record and you have a psych record. And they don't get to see your psych record. So they look at your discharge summary and go, oh yeah, buggered knees, buggered ankles, dislocated shoulder, rah, rah. So very seldom are the two match together to say, oh, okay, which one's the real driver here. And as I said, I think the stigma of my cohort or my generation is that you just toughed it out because the real risk was that you would lose your career rather than actually getting some genuine help. And to the best of my knowledge, that's actually changed to a degree. Certainly this generation of aviators, soldiers and seamen are far more vocal about their mental health, and their on-base facilities are far better.
Let's talk in some detail then about your deployments, and you've spoken about Timor under Interfed. What was it like on both at Tyndall trying to get people there, and of course the landing at Nicola Loboto Airport?
Dilly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tyndall was another loaves and fishes logistics challenge, really. The first we knew, and this is sort of when compartment planning was in its infancy, the first that we knew that there was going to be a major activity was when the base EXO said, better free up some hangar space. And I went, how much? He goes, I don't know. So I rang what was then theatre headquarters and said, she's got this really weird request. The base EXO seems to know nothing about it. I've got a squadron of helos coming in. Yep. And by the way, you need to provide X, Y, Z. I went, this is Tyndall, people. There is no air-conditioned hangars. This is the hard stand. I've still got fighter jets operating. And by the way, the US Marine Corps Viper unit is doing a roto right over this period. And they said, well, tough luck. The TAG West boys arrive tomorrow do you have anybody who can marshal aircraft? And I went, we can marshal aircraft, but I reckon there's about 2 of us who know how to marshal helos. So there we were, or me and one other who's ex-army, marshalling in the helos, which we hadn't done for ages. And the Tag West boys said, yeah, so where are we staying? I went, see that hangar over there? That's the best I can do. And they went, yeah, that'll do us. I said, but I've still got to build pallets in there. And they went, okay. So they left a bit of an alleyway that we could get the forklifts in and out. The first thing I said to the det commander was, you need to put up either a light screen or a visual screen of some sort. And he goes, why? I said, 400 metres over there is the civilian airport. The minute that they realise there's something going on, you're going to have telephoto lenses straight through the doors of the hangar. So then I had to zip down to 322 warehouse where I picked up a truckload of cam nets, and we made a double cam net awning so that they could have the doors open, we could get in and out, but the media, which we fully realised would be there very soon, couldn't see in. They were there less than 24 hours when the first squadron of C-130s arrived, followed by the second squadron of C-130s and the US Marine Corps, and 4 Orions, and although apparently they were never there, 2 F111s. So it was pack and stack parking on the hard stand. I also managed the fuel farms at the time. So we had tankers going everywhere because we're still refuelling 75 Squadron. We still had a squadron of F-18s from the Marine Corps. Then we had all the cargo airlift coming in from, they were all coming in through out of Okinawa into us. And C-130s which were doing the evacuation of Australian nationals out of Timor. So you had the helos going in. Obviously the Tag West boys went in a long time before the official deployment and were giving us on the ground intelligence. But you also had the extraction flights coming in and out, and they were coming into Darwin, but that was quite a... They'd unload in Darwin and come back to Tyndall, so refuelling, and yeah, it was quite crazy times. And 77 Squadron were up as well, on just a deployment or an exercise deployment. So it was flat out, and we were building pallets, aircraft pallets, which are the big aluminium pallets, in 38 degrees outside. We're all in rugger shorts and t-shirts, which is your standard tarmac dress at the time, and then you'd get an aircraft coming in, and the protocol was that the air movements officer would jump on board. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Tyndall, where the local time is blah, and this is what's going to happen. You know, you go into go into the lounge. We'll get your bags to you. Rah rah rah. What was also happening at the time is our A team of air movers were recalled to Townsville. So I lost my warrant officer and sergeant and 4 troops, which out of a team of 10 normal routine stuff left us extraordinarily short. So yeah, building, because we couldn't build the pallets inside unless they were a blacklist load, because the boys were sleeping, so you're building them outside, and you'd put your knee on the aluminium pallet and get a 2nd degree burn. It was that hot. Probably the standard Garwood, how to get in trouble in any circumstances. A caribou turned up, and I said to the boys, keep packing. I will go and get these lot off. And of course the caribou is packed with people in full dress uniform. It's like, righto, I'm in filthy ruggers and t-shirt. And my rather vernacular approach was, yeah, look, it's bloody hot outside. I won't waste time talking. Grab your gear, get into the lounge. The corporal will look after you in there. It's air-conned. We'll get your bags to you, and then I'll give you a welcome to Tyndall brief. What I didn't know was that my future boss was on that aircraft, and later made a scathing assessment of this raggedy, poorly dressed, sweaty junior officer addressing senior officers so casually. What he didn't know, however, was one of my bosses from Headquarters Training Command at Middle Head was also on that aircraft. And that bloke turned out to be a future Governor-General and was probably the face of Interfet. Anyway, he strolled up in the lounge and goes, "Raylene, how you going? What are you doing in Air Force uniform?" I went, oh, sir, what the hell are you doing here? And he goes, "I'm the brigadier in charge of this thing." And I went, "I think we're going to be all right." So yes, whilst the assessment was pretty damning, as an operator, you sort of don't really care about looks, it's about getting the job done.
So do you have any assessment there over those times of the push to Timor, Mark 1, of how many people moved through there and how much freight you moved over, say, 2 weeks?
Funnily enough, I keep all of my load plans for, and it was a month that the boys were there. So in terms of aircraft movements, we were looking at a day, bare minimum, and that includes the F-18s turning over and the Marines, 300 aircraft movements a day. We had to have slingshot shuttles is the term we used, which was 6 B doubles or triples coming from Darwin to Tyndall to fill up the fuel farm. We were going through about 90 to 150,000 litres of AVTUR a day, and the fuel farm at that point in time just did not, even 3 of them full, just didn't have the capacity to keep the aircraft flying. So BP, we had a partnering agreement with BP, and they were able to arrange 24/7 rotos of the triples to keep us flying. In terms of people coming through, we had, so there was 120 of TAG West. I think there were an additional, there was 60 from TAG West, 120 of the Ready Reaction Force from 3. Thankfully we didn't have too many AFP, but you also had all the squadrons and their techos and their air crew all sort of coming through air movements at the time. So busy is probably an understatement. We did the recce into BAP, and then Ian took the support debt in. So we sort of, you do your normal thing at Alias Salayam, and suddenly somebody says, "Yeah, you're jumping on a Herc and you're going into BAP, and we need to assess."
Just elaborate what BAP is. Remember,
Baghdad International Airport.
Yeah.
So there was already coalition forces on the ground, but not many, and we need to do a logistics assessment of the footprint that would operate the airfield for the coalition. So it was that the recce flight was very nerve-wracking. None of us really knew what to expect. The intel briefings weren't real crash hot. And I think my enduring memory of that initial reconnaissance force was in Kevlar, and your webbing and all the rest of it trudging up the stairs, and there were 3,000 steps, I think, to the top of BAP, the air control tower. That's my enduring, I reckon that was 10 kilo weight loss, just like that. So we were able to give the ECSS a very good idea of what was on the ground and what they'd need to take. and that then transposed to loads coming in from Australia or dragged from Kuwait and the Middle East, and all the Diplo clearances and all that sort of stuff. So it was sort of like second trip in when the ECSS put down. I just went in to facilitate the setup, and then I came out and ended up bouncing through Basra, just in time to catch my roommate from Tyndall, who was deployed with the UK MAMS, which is the Mobile Air Movements Service. So she and I caught up, had a quick chat, and she was off to Akatere, I think. And I spent the night in Basra and then jumped a flight home and came back to Qatar.
So the establishment of the Expeditionary Support Wing, what did that entail of? So as they set that up, what was that actually there for?
Depends on who you talk to. Some will say it's a self-tying shoelace. Others will say that the best place to provide organic support is not a war zone. You should have practiced it before then. But there had been, the ECSS and the ECSW concept was so young that this was the first test of operation, if you like. So there'd already been issues in Qatar with the ECSS not understanding how to support a fighter squadron, and the fighter squadron unable to engage with an ECSS because fighter squadrons are self-sufficient. And that led to quite a bit of tension. But the ECSS that was operating out of Doha Airport with the C-130s had a much better relationship because it was airlift, it wasn't so much combat operations. So 386, who were in Doha, they had a fantastic working relationship with the airlift guys, and that went forward to BIAP because obviously the jets were not flying out of Baghdad. So effectively, just like a construction squadron or a support squadron, your expeditionary support wing goes in, sets up things like, depending on the operation, catering, ablutions, accommodation, airfield services, warehousing, anything that a squadron needs to operate. Sometimes they don't go in heavy, they'll go in light, and they'll contract services out, which is pretty much what happened in BIAP. But you've got everything from combat engineers that are, or expeditionary engineers, airfield engineers that are doing runway lighting, air traffic detachments that are going in providing air traffic control, military police, road movements, all the way through to life support fitters who come in with the squadron. They need a certain climate controlled environment to keep the flying gear safe. You've also got to regas all the suits and stuff like that. So thankfully 386 had a really good idea of how to support a C-130 detachment. Had it been the other way around, I think we would have run into trouble very early on.
So you spoke about the Fighter Squadron 75, which I recall was supported by elements of 77. So
everybody wants to come to the party. They didn't get past Diego Garcia, but that's unlucky.
Yeah, we won't talk about that war. No. So having the Fighter Squadron based in Qatar, Al Udeid, what was the point of that? I don't talk about it in the strategic
politically, I think it was the integration of a niche force into the American air war, and certainly Gulf War I with Rolling Thunder had established that, you know, if you go in and provide significant air superiority, it allows your ground forces to operate at will. There were some superb bits of improvised strategic commander's intent that happened during that phase. So I guess the surreal dislocation for us, you're working up logistically, the Squadron, Genevieve Soames was the Squadron Suppo. They brought two 747s worth of gear in, which included the entire flyaway kit for 81 wing. Now each one of those flyaway kits weighs about 8.5 tonne, just on the very edge of exploitation for a C-130 load. They brought 5 of them. That was the entire repairable inventory management for F-18s in Australia. We'd exhausted those facts by week 3 of flying in the North Arabian Gulf. Things like in Australia we didn't have air-to-air refuelling, so learning to catch the boom with the big heavy tankers, the dust getting into stab actuators, all that sort of stuff. So that was all good. We were getting the spares in or borrowing them from from the Marine Corps. But what we didn't think of was the repair chain back, because we had no workbenches, if you like, to repair this stuff. So at one point, Mel Hupfeld, who went on to become Chief of the Air Force, come over and sort of started chest poking me, going, "Where's my spares?" And they're coming in, so I can only get them in here. And he goes, no, the ones that I've got sitting here in the warehouse, what am I going to do with them? I went, oh, repair chain inventory, shit. So then we had to get dip clearances for those spares to go back out of the Middle East, bounce via DG, back to Willitown to get repaired, and then come back again. So that kept us busy enough, but it also got the pilots very familiar with the North Arabian Gulf. The boys from one CCS combat communication squadrons had a TIFF, for want of a better word, and in that TIFF they had satellite TV.
So let's go back. We'll start that again. Because acronyms.
Oh,
remember, yeah.
Acronym Queen.
Okay, so start that again. Just so that TIFF is, so the boys from one combat comms squadron, no comms, no bombs, had a communication hub where they were running the secret network and also all telecommunications in and out of the Middle East. What they also had was satellite TV, so we're getting BBC World and one of the American channels streamed live. So when the air war kicked off, the dislocation was a wave of aircraft, normally 6 fighter aircraft, launching every 3 minutes for close on 7 hours. It was just constant high decibel noise. You sort of just got numb to it. But you just hear them take off, because the 75 Squadron and the comms centre was literally on the edge of the runway, and the Camp Andy, which was the accommodation, was not far off the piano keys at the takeoff zone. But we're sitting there and watching the payload fall on Baghdad and listening, you'd heard the aircraft take off, and then 45 minutes later you're seeing the very real application of air power. So that was really, it was surreal in the sense that here we are, nice and safe, watching our aircraft, coalition aircraft drop bombs on Baghdad. So there was also an American aircraft that crashed in the early days, and we had the man missing flyover. That's a formation of jets where they come through in a 3-ship, and the centre aircraft peels off on an India, which is that's basically sitting up on the tail of the aircraft and accelerating away, and the other 2 keep going. And an Australian pilot had the honour of flying the centre aircraft. So that was quite sombre. I think the pilots started to realise this was not, beer and Skittles time. And then you had people, 2 particular pilots. Australia's
targeting rules were very different to the Americans. We were effectively flying in support of SF elements in the Middle East, and the SF elements were obviously trying to find and target Iraqi ground troops and any storage of chemical weapons. Probably the most outstanding bit of application of commander's intent that came out of that entire operation was a 75 Squadron pilot who was contacted by SF Det on the ground and said, look, we know that there are bad guys in this building, and this building was a cement factory in the desert. Quite a sizable compound. The SF guys wanted payload dropped on the compound, but the pilot said, how about we go for minimum use of force, and if that doesn't work, well, I'm loaded and I can come back. Anyway, chaps flew over the top of the compound, probably close enough to scrape the paint on the underbelly. The SF boys who were doing the targeting said they could actually see the concrete dust come out of the sides of the compound like a chrysanthemum effect as he went over, doing probably Mark 4. Breaking the sound barrier, huge noise, compound doors fly open, big gates fly open, and the Iraqi military that were there pouring out, going, oh my God, we're about to be destroyed. Chaps was on station for 9 hours over that kill zone. He lost, I think, 4.5, maybe 5 kilos just in sweat. You're in an F-18, there's a canopy that's made of perspex, you're in the North Arabian sun, there is no shade. And he got out emaciated. But yeah, the SF still talk about that low pass, so it was good to be around when that happened.
So in effect, exceeding the sound barrier.
Sonic boom was as good as a payload. Yeah, and scared them out.
Caused them all to.
Yep. Just in case he comes back with some real stuff, we're getting out now.
Yeah. After Iraq, where did your career take you?
So yeah, back to Townsville for a short time, then down to RAF Base Wagga. I wasn't happy about going to Wagga. I was an operational logistics officer. What I didn't realise at the time was that was seen as a respite posting. I didn't think that I needed respite. But when I got to that base, one of the medical officers said, probably a quarter of the base is down here to spool down, to actually come off that operational tempo that we've been doing since 1999 and dealing with issues. And I went, yeah, that's not me, I'm fine. Turns out I wasn't, but so from there to Canberra, as I said, ATSOC, Australian Technical Staff Officers course. At that point in time, my mental health issues became far more apparent to me, and I then went across to DMO, a Defence Material Organisation, and started working on the repairable inventory and slow moving items register, which is exactly as exciting as it sounds. That was about the time that Moorebank was being civilianised. All the warehousing was being contracted, and Defence were being paid, or were being charged in volumetrics rather than here's a warehouse, you just pay for that for the month, year, decade. So we still had World War II spares that we had to find that were extremely valuable. We had slow moving, you don't often use them, kind of items that needed to be stored and kept but hadn't been rotated. And such was my absolute enthusiasm for that gig that I volunteered to go back to Timor in 2007 and got the job of the Contract Management Coordination Centre, which is a glorified name for garrison support contract manager. And that was a team of 12 from all services. It was truly the only joint team in the headquarters. I suppose the ops boys would say, the watch keepers would say they were joint, but we had more of them, so we win. And that was an eye-opener in terms of finding out that people had been there in the past, had no idea what the contract looked like, what the key performance indicators were, and whether PDL toll, Patrick's, were actually performing to them or not. So I made myself extraordinarily popular with my subordinates by insisting that they learn to read a contract. It was the first time that they'd read it. We didn't come in and out as a rotational team, so there were guys there that were in their last 2 months. There's others that had arrived only a month before me. So it was really quite challenging to get the team into some sort of cohesion and then into some sort of contract management. So I think the most entertaining bit about that was David Hurley, who I think was then Jock. Dropped over for a visit. You get your standard briefing by all the majors, and they're also terrified of, briefing, a 1-star. His RSM was actually asleep beside him, which I found quite amusing. Anyway, I jumped up and said, "Well, sir, there's good news and there's not so good news." And he goes, "Really, Raylene?" And all the other guys go, "How does he know your name?" I'd actually briefed him at ATSOC, so I had a previous interaction with him. I said, "Yes, sir, you're $4 million behind in your contract management." And the RSM woke up and went, "What?" And I said, "It's been mismanaged and PDL toll have been failing to meet their KPIs." So that got his attention, and it got me detention, I think, is probably the best word. We had to liaise with JLU Headquarters Joint Logistics Unit, or JLC as it was, Joint Logistics Command, and we had to rewrite the contract. The contract hadn't been renewed for 4 years. And we had to rewrite the contract, which we did over a 4-day period, and contemporise the contract in I guess, consultation with PDL Toll, who had a big presence on the island. So that included the aircraft out of Darwin, that was our resup aircraft, port facilities, catering, air conditioning, accommodation, hire vehicles, the whole medical support. It was a big effort, but I was so proud of my guys that, 3 months ago I'd never read a contract, let alone enforced one, rewriting a complex garrison support contract to a very high standard.
So with Toll, just explain why the ADF needed them.
Look, I think the ADF has moved to a model where once upon a time, Air Force at least, when I joined in 1996, there were 26,500 people in the Air Force. We then had what was called the Defence Reform Program, where they ruthlessly cut numbers in the ADF. Army managed to avoid that quite nicely, but that's because they maintained that they were warfighters. So by the time I got to Tyndall in 1997, the Air Force was 13,000. That's not many people to maintain operational tempo, let alone support operations. So the move was to contract garrison support so that Army, Air Force and Navy could go forward and fight the war, and there would be contractors to do the catering, the cleaning, the refuelling. Don't think it actually worked. Just the the manpower that was required, the shadow postings, where you'd be posted to a unit but wouldn't actually be there. But in operations, the ADF can't sustain itself and either has to leverage off coalition host nation support, or, as we were the lead nation in Timor, contractors. And PDL Toll were bloody good at their job, there's no doubt about it. But it meant that resources that were required elsewhere or were not able to provide 6-month support could be taken somewhere else. Bearing in mind by 2008 we had Middle East, still had Op Astute running, we were still in Afghanistan, and we'd had 4 HDRs, humanitarian disaster relief operations. So the 13,500 people in the Air Force at least were really starting to suffer from operational fatigue, and the Army wasn't much better. Not sure about the Navy.
So, what happened on the morning of the 11th of February 2008?
Oh, crikey. We were at PT at Dollar Beach, which we'd taken 2 vehicles. We were going to, doing PT, physical training down on the beach. The contract management cell had much greater freedom to wander around the island than most of the forces over there, and we kind of didn't abuse that, but we were lucky to go a lot of places. We heard what we thought was gunfire. What? About 2 minutes later, the radio that was in the vehicle bursts into "Get home, get home, get home." And this was from headquarters. So we piled into the 2 vehicles, came up off the beach, came around the corner, and there were some bodies on the road, and a knot of security people around a prone figure on the ground. I had a medical officer with me, and there was no threat at that point in time. There's obviously no gunman anywhere evident. So we put down a defensive perimeter with the 8 people that we had, and sent Roland and an aviation officer in to see what the issue was. The aviation officer came back to me white as a sheet and said, "That's Ramos Horta and he's bleeding to death." So Roland Oak, who was the junior medical officer, very young fella, ended up wrist if not elbow deep in Ramos Horta, trying to hold on to severed arteries and stop him bleeding out on the road. And we maintained that defensive perimeter until the QRF turned up in the APC. We communicated back to the headquarters and said, the President is on the ground, we are on site, what do you want us to do? And there was sort of radio silence. They sort of didn't know what they wanted us to do. QRF turned up, and we were able to put President Horta into the back of the APC, the personnel carrier, and the QRF radioed back to headquarters and said, we have the President, and we were then told to return to base and debrief, which is when we found out that there'd been another assassination attempt on the Prime Minister of East Timor. So a concerted attack. Neither was successful, thank goodness, but it then threw into an operation to find, apprehend, arrest, or otherwise the figurehead of this guerrilla movement. For us, for Roland, I cannot tell you how much work that young man did. He coordinated with Aspen. He literally held slippery bleeding arteries from the President's home to Aspen. He also coordinated the medical response and medevac back to Darwin, and Aspen and Roland organised for any volunteers, and I think there's about 80 of them in the end. There was not enough blood in the Aspen blood bank, so we were asking the task force guys, the battle group, to give blood, and Aspen managed to stabilise the President sufficiently after 48 hours that we could then medevac him back to Darwin, and in the outcome of all that, up rocks SecDet West again, or TAG West, which is the SAS boys from Perth. In comes a ready reaction company from Sydney, and the Australian Federal Police. So we had an operation within an operation, and my job during that was the RSO and I, or the induction into theatre. Where are we going to put them? How are we going to feed them? Where's all this sort of stuff happening? And it was certainly challenging, but it's probably the finest bit of operational logistics that I've done.
Post operations, when did you decide that it was enough?
I think I decided in 2009 that this probably, the Air Force was changing, but I was still enjoying my job. I was in a great posting, and I just had the very weird opportunity to mentor a group of young pilots, which was such good fun. However, Dad, who was still home in Tassie, had a heart attack. I took long service leave to come and be with him and then help him recover. And during that time, I somehow ended up engaged to the boy next door, who I'd known since I was 7, which meant, as a generational farmer, he wasn't going to be able to follow me on a posting career. And after 24 years of being a singly, and the old saying is shaft a singly, if there's a posting that needs filling, they'll send a singly rather than a family, all that sort of stuff. I decided to put my relationship with Robert first, and asked DP to get me a compassionate posting to 29 Squadron here in Hobart, at which point I was told, sorry, everybody has ageing parents, there's no posting available for you. I thought, well, 2 can play that game, and I put in my discharge, and discharged in 2009. I just got to Melbourne and had my removal from Queensland. My horses had already come home when I got a phone call saying, we've found you a posting. I went, I don't think you understand, I'm discharged. And the person on the end of the phone was my first boss in the Army, which was Liz Cosson, who then went on to be the secretary for DVA. And Liz said, no, you will be able to live in Launceston, you'll be working out of Patterson Barracks, you'll fly in, fly out when we need you for contract appraisal and garrison support. She said, so please rescind your discharge and you start work on the 15th of January. Right, okay. So that was perfect. I actually worked here at Patterson Barracks for 3 years doing the garrison support reform project, and then going to bases, seeing what they really needed, trying to figure out how DSG could then support that. In 2012, Rob passed away from terminal cancer. We'd been together for 3 years, and suddenly I didn't know what my life looked like anymore. Would I go back to the ADF? What would I do? For legal reasons, I was unable to leave the farm that Robert and I lived on. So I took another remote posting, and apparently lots of complication, not to mention grief, but in the end it was decided that it was better for the organisation, not necessarily better for me, that the organisation would seek a medical discharge, and that was pretty much how I left the Defence Force. I was lucky enough to have a superb transitions officer in Melbourne. Did a transition seminar, went, well, that's absolutely useless to me. What it did, the first thing I noticed was, all the senior officers and senior NCOs that were there, and the absolute absence of troops. And you can tell an officer, especially an army officer, in civvies, because they've all got chambray shirts, tweed jackets and moleskins and RM boots. And I said to the transition team, yeah, see, look, it's got a set on. I said, where's the ORs? Where are the soldiers? And that was the first inkling that I had, that command was not releasing the people who most needed transition to transition seminars. At that point in time, I'm not sure what the policy is now, but at that point in time, depending on where you fitted into your career in terms of length of time, you had up to 3 transition seminars paid for by the service. I have since dealt with ORs that never attended one, because we can't afford to lose you. We can't do this, we can't do that. And that certainly gave me an indication that there was a significant portion of the ADF not getting their entitlements, and getting out without a clue as to what they were going to do next. And you would have seen it, Phil. You go past an army barracks after about 4 months after a major deployment, and out the front, especially Laverack, there's all these shiny V8s where the boys have got all their deployment money, come back, and then suddenly, when that deployment money's ended, can't afford the V8 that they've just bought and have to sell it. So the used car market in Townsville was pretty good. But that was the outward obvious signs of basic life skills that you're simply not taught in the military, and they're not taught in transitions either. The amount of people that I have come across since getting out, whether it's doing advocacy work or working as a peer advisor, that don't have a Medicare card, don't even know what a Medicare card is. They've been their whole life in the military, and the assumption is that, of course, the military will look after you when you get out, but the military's responsibility and duty of care finishes as you walk out the gate and hand in your ID card. And then you are at the mercy of an organisation called DVA. Now, to be fair, and full disclosure, I spent 4 years working with DVA. There are good people in that organisation. The Royal Commission is forcing a transformative culture, but it's 20 years too late for most of us. So DVA, or the 3 Veterans Acts, they're all workers' compensation. They're not a welfare, they're not a paramilitary, they are workers' compensation. You need to understand the requirements of that act, and many of our generation are 3 acts, 1 body, and none of them talk to each other. So you're not going to roll straight into your gold card because you've got acts that don't accrue incapacity points, and you've got injuries that were in operations and weren't in operations, and it's just a mess. Whether the legislative harmonisation program fixes that, we can only hope. But my question is, what are we going to lose in that process? And I don't think anybody knows that answer yet. But yes, so in an effort to understand the DVA process, I was extraordinarily lucky to get myself an advocate in Launceston by the name of Gary Bevan, and Gary would have to be one of two advocates in Australia that is simply outstanding. And although he gives me so much crap, he also taught me to be a welfare officer initially, and then to train as a level 2 advocate to help other veterans. And that inculcation to serve community or peers, I think, is one of the best and one of the worst things about being a veteran. It is very easy to become a victim veteran, and, you know, where's my entitlement? Bloody DVA. Oh, it's so unfair. You know, I need 80 points. I want a gold card and $90,000 for my kids. The legislation is better than any other country in the world. It doesn't mean that the legislation can't be better, but I think what most veterans fail to understand or haven't been taught or just told is that the military promises that DVA look after you when you get out. The military is in no position to make that promise. And I don't think Joint Transitions Authority is any better either, just quietly. DVA goes, well, we'll look after you if you meet these criteria. And I think that's where the angst and the drama, and also a bit of the historical legacy, we would be stuffed without the Vietnam veterans. What they have done for veterans' welfare in this country it's almost hard to comprehend. Without their advocacy for their own members when they came home, and through numerous investigations and royal commissions, we certainly wouldn't have an open arms mental health service. It's the only government-funded mental health service in the Commonwealth. We wouldn't have the new MERCA and DERCA legislation, and we probably wouldn't have the plethora of ESOs, all looking for the veteran dollar. To my mind, the biggest sin that has been committed, the biggest crime that has happened to veterans is the monetisation of the veteran rather than the recovery and reintegration of the veteran.
You mentioned about some other work you're doing. Tell me about your work around the Veterans Retreat.
Okay, so it's a 4-bedroom, nearly new house located at Interlaken, which is up on the Central Highlands. It's about halfway between anywhere and anywhere, halfway between Launceston and Hobart, but it is in a shack precinct. So there's no infrastructure up there at all in terms of streetlights, post offices, shops, and it is adjacent to the Vietnam Veterans Bush Retreat, which was built about 30 years ago, and it was built to be a space that the Bush Retreat and our retreat was built to be a place where you could get away from the world, get away from the white noise, that was comfortable and safe either for a group of veterans to get together and go fishing, or to take your family and just chillax. 2018, the Tasmanian government offered a inland fisheries parks hut to RSL Tasmania for younger veterans, because unless you're a Vietnam veteran, you couldn't use the Vietnam Veterans Retreat. And the RSL said no, there's no requirement for it. Thankfully, the Vietnam Veterans Association of Tasmania said, actually we think there is, and we'll take up that project. And with countless volunteer hours and a grant from the Tasmanian government, 2 years of construction, we have the Veterans Retreat. It's managed by a team of 3 contemporaneous, because people hate the word contemporary veterans, and I'm not sure that any of us are young, but it is a brand new 4-bedroom house with all the mod cons, sleeps 11, and it looks over Lake Sorell, and the serenity is superb. I've been up there in the snow, I've been up there in the middle of summer, great fishing. Lake Sorell's recently become carp free. They're starting to pull good brown trout out of there, but it's just a place where you can go for a bit of peace and quiet. Yeah, we're managing that. We're 2 years into operation. I think we've had approximately 108 guests, many of them return guests, and we are trying to find our way forward with competing mindsets external to the organisation committee of what happens to that retreat and the precinct that it's in. So by April or May of this year, there'll be 3 buildings on the precinct. There'll be the Vietnam Veterans Retreat, our retreat, the Veterans Retreat, and they are currently constructing a training facility up there. That is all leased to the Vietnam Veterans Association. The Vietnam Veterans Association is rapidly approaching block obsolescence, and we are trying to navigate a way forward that leaves the retreat in contemporary veterans' hands, not an organisation in Queensland.
That's the Veterans Retreat. What about your work with horses?
Yes. The whole synchronicity of I've always had horses, often horses that have a certain death wish which involves me, not them. But when I was in Tyndall of a weekend, I'd go mustering. One of the guys had a mustering contract, and the first I knew about it, he said, "Oh, here you've got a saddle up here." I went, "Yeah." He goes, "You want to come horse riding?" I went, "Yes, thanks." And started mustering first on Mambaloo and then on VRD, which is Vic River Downs. Victoria River Downs is part of AACO, Australian Agricultural Co, and they had one of the first official Waler sanctuaries in the Northern Territory, and I was introduced to the breed, and I thought, they're decent looking horses. I then went and did the Great Australian Cattle Drive in South Australia while I was on leave, and ran into Shane Oldfield, who is the owner of Clayton Station. Clayton Station is part of the chain of lagoons that Kidman set up, and Kidman was one of the original breeders of the remount trade, not only for the AIF but for every British unit that was in the region, India, Bangladesh, places like that. So I went down for 2 weeks as a paid customer, ended up staying for 5 weeks volunteering with the pack horses, the pack train, and came away with 2 Walers, one of which I still own, and dragged them around the country. So they came across with me to Canberra, then up to Queensland, and of course the Waler horse is the breed that took the Australian light horse to Damascus and was the first successful conquering crusade since the Knights Templar to actually enter Damascus and Jerusalem, which is no small feat. And they are legendary in terms of their load carrying and their endurance. But I think what sets them apart is they are a breed like no other. They want to bond with you, and they have to be number one horse in the pecking order, which is kind of difficult when you've got 6 or 8 or 10 and you're breeding them, because every young horse wants to form that bond with you and go, well, you're my human. So I now breed them. I'm the only breeder in Tasmania. The other breeder, her stallion died. Still get out and work with the mountain cattlemen. I'm lucky enough to get an invite pretty much every year up to Lee's paddocks to bring the cattle out, or help Judy do the burn-off up in the paddocks, which is freehold in the middle of the walls of Jerusalem National Park, and still doing traditional horsemanship with them. Also lucky enough to have taken 6-8 months off and rode my horses from Cooktown to Victoria on the Bicentennial National Trail. So, wow. Don't recommend doing it solo, but sometimes you have to.
So as we come to the end of the interview, just reflecting back, what's the future look like for you now?
Look, I wish I knew. I'm 52 and I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. I would still like to work with veterans, although I have to moderate my impatience with that whole victim-veteran approach. I think, the quietly, you'll meet somebody who's a veteran. Have you got your white card? Have you done this? Have you done that? Oh no, I don't know anything about that. And some of these people have been out for 20 years. That's a way that I can still help my cohort without being caught up in the political expediency of the ESO world. I'm still young enough to work, and I think that's really important. You have to have a purpose in life. However, before that, I've just been accepted on the Trans-Australia expedition, the Land Rover Australia Trans-Australian expedition. So the Defender and I will be going from Byron Bay to Exmouth and then back up the Canning Stock route and across the Gun Barrel, hopefully not on the back of a recovery truck. And after that, I've made myself a bit of a promise in 2026 that I'm going to walk the Camino, which is 800k one way. I want to do that in about a month, and then once I get to Santiago, the Santiago de Compostela, St James's Cathedral, then I'd like to walk into Portugal from down onto the second Camino from there. So maybe 3 months in Europe. The best news is that I've recently discovered there's a horse riding mob that do a fair chunk of the Camino, so I may not have to do it all on foot.
Excellent, excellent. So it's always hard, like you're talking about the places and, Aludede and that sort of stuff, and, it's just like, wow, back there.
Oh, hell yeah. And, when you drop, because when we first got to Aludede, the headquarters at Ali Asalaam, and there were 9,000 coalition troops on Aludede, and 13 vehicle passes, and I was the only Australian to hold a vehicle pass. And the vehicle pass simply meant that you didn't have to go through the bomb pit each time you came in and out of the base. There's a bomb search pit.
That's right.
So the amount of running around I had to do for every man and his dog. You'd have to go to Doha to sign the Diplo clearances. You'd have to go and pick up The mail for Ali Salam dropped that at headquarters, jibba there, and then you have to go back, and we were, I think, probably 2 weeks in, and that British squaddie was shot in Riyadh while he was driving. So at that point in time, they said, right, you have to be safe. What does that mean? You have to take a bloke with you. How's that going to make me safe? But it meant that, because for many in that detachment, they got off base once in their entire deployment, and that was to a health resort about, I'd say, 4 days before they left the country. But I was off base all the time, and it wasn't too much of an exaggeration. Like, you'd be driving down a 2-lane highway, and there was no shoulder, there was just desert, and then camels. But
then dead camels.
There you were. And trucks that the axle would fall out of when you were driving behind them around a roundabout. But you'd see this black BMW M3 or some really expensive cruiser come flying up behind you, and they'd flash the lights. And if you didn't get off, quite often, and thankfully it didn't happen to me, but I was driving one day and the bloke didn't get over, and the passenger side, which was on that side, driving in American rules, passenger side window comes down, bloke with an Uzi. Oh, well, that's one way to get rid of road rage. I was very careful then to clear the highways when the lights flashed behind me. But in many ways, you just can't ask for a better career. And there's days when I think they cannot pay me for this. Like, you're sitting on the ramp of a C-130 going over Kununurra and Lake Argyle, like that far off the deck, or down the west coast at Tassie, and you think this is just amazing. And there's other days where you think, oh, they don't pay me enough, especially during the Catherine floods. That was tough work.
All very, very interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. Look, it's part of defence life, and it's kind of hard, I think, to find the same adrenaline in Civvy Street. But I guess that contingent identity, where people identify so closely with the uniform that they forget that they were an individual before they joined, and they're an individual when they get out. That contingent identity is inculcated. But there's recognition, there's compensation, there's rehabilitation, and to an extent, DVA do all three of those pretty well. But recovery and reintegration into community?
No one does.
No.